Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Kevin Connors, and we're going to be talking about the heart rate variability test that we do in our office, why we do it, what we look for, what it could help indicate, and how we can make corrections to help our bodies heal better through that testing. So let's get going. So as we look at our test that we do, it comes back with a printout like this. And really, this center part of the graph is what we're looking at. This is the balance between your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous system. So, as I tell people, you have to kind of remember back to high school biology and what those two things are. You have a voluntary nervous system, like moving your arms and your legs, and you have an involuntary nervous system, or something that's relatively involuntary. You don't have a lot of volitional control over your heart rate and your liver function. You don't have to think about digestion, spleen, make red blood cells. You don't even know that any things exist. These things are done automatically. So think of your automatic nervous system as that's what's your autonomic nervous system. It's separated into two components, your sympathetics and your parasympathetics. Kind of confusing, but they're two kind of opposing systems. Your sympathetics are your fight or flight response. On this graph, this is what we see right here. This is a bar graph, so this blue is the height of the sympathetic response in this sample person. This is the parasympathetic. The parasympathetic in this person is a little more dominant. That's what we'd really want to see in a patient that is struggling with a chronic illness. We'd want to see a more dominant parasympathetic nervous system in general. But we tend to say that we want them in the middle and balanced in this green middle zone. That would be a normal response. Your sympathetic nervous system controls your fight or flight response. Everybody has experienced this. You have a police car pull up in front of you or behind you with the lights on, and you feel a sympathetic response. Immediately when you see them in the rearview mirror with the lights on, or you hear the lights, you get a little flustered, your heart rate goes through the roof, your blood pressure goes up, you get a little clammy, your eyes dilate, blood shuns to your extremity for you to run away from this crisis situation. So in that case, in that immediate instance, you would get a sympathetic response. It would heighten this response, so it would spike the sympathetics. That's what it's supposed to do. That's how you deal with a crisis. So if a polar bear jumped out in front of you, you need a sympathetic nervous system to kick in order for you to be able to access the amount of adrenal flow and ATP production for you to run away from that polar bear. You can do these seemingly superhuman things in the middle of a sympathetic response, but we don't want to live there. The parasympathetic response controls all the things that you want to be happening if you're dealing with a chronic disease. It controls your digestion. It controls your detoxification pathways. It controls your ability to make red blood cells, your ability to make white blood cells. So it's your immune function. So really, when we're fighting a chronic disease, most diseases, we'd like to be a little parasympathetic dominant. This little diagram illustrates that. So when your sympathetics kick in, your eyes dilate, you get a little cotton mouth, your bronchial tubes dilate to get oxygen to your tissues really quick. It inhibits digestion because, hey, we don't need to digest food. We're going to get eaten by a polar bear. It stimulates breakdown of glucose, glycogen stores in the liver to glucose, so you have readily accessible energy production by your cells, by your muscle cells particularly, and your heart rate increasing so that you can run away from this polar bear. It stimulates epinephrine and norepinephrine release by your adrenal glands. It's a cortisol response in itself by your adrenal glands. It's going to do all sorts of other things. Your parasympathetic reaction, on the other hand, is going to constrict your pupil. It's going to cause excess salivation, so you're going to have more saliva in your mouth because it's getting ready for digestion, and saliva has talent in there to help digest carbohydrates. It's going to slow your heart rate. So this is what slows down your heart rate, decreases the contractility of your heart. You get some bronchial constriction because we're not running away from a polar bear. You're worried about digesting food. You're worried about detoxification in the liver. You're worried about sexual function and reproduction. You're worried about immune system population and destruction of pathogens. So we need this to deal with somebody who has cancer. We don't want a hypersympathetic response. So when we look at a graph like this would be good if it was a cancer patient of mine. If it was reversed and sympathetic was way up here and parasympathetic was way down here, that would be something we don't want to see. So some of the abnormal findings on this test would be, well, worst would be they're both way down here. That means that part of the nervous system is basically shutting down. We don't see that very often. We don't want to see that at all. Another abnormal finding would be what I stated, a hypersympathetic response. That's very common. People are stuck in a hypersympathetic response. They're stuck in a sympathetic dominance. And another one that we see a lot with Lyme patients and anybody that has inflammation in the brain, and I'll explain why, is you see both of these are through the roof. Both of them are capped out. And the graph here would show these two green things way out here. It's literally capped out. The sympathetic and the parasympathetic are firing in overdrive. Now, there's only a few reasons why that would happen. And let me, not to get too nerdy on you, but let's explain that from a neurological perspective. So this is a cross-section of a person's brain. This is the front of your head. This is your forehead right here. This is going down your spine right here. This is the back of your head here, your occipital lobe that controls all your vision. Your frontal lobe, which makes you really human, controls your thought, reasoning center, where you make decisions and such. Your parietal lobe, where you have your sensory function, and the cutaway here, and behind this piece here is your temporal lobe, which houses memory and hearing and a lot of other things too. So we really want to concentrate on the frontal lobe here because its communication to these deep parts of the brain, this is what's called your archaeocortex here, is what we're talking about when we're dealing with the sympathetics and the parasympathetics. So the sympathetics and the parasympathetics are part of what would be called your older nervous system, where the cortex is a newer part of your nervous system, meaning many animals don't have a cortex, a neocortex here. They only have what's called the archaeocortex, or the reptilian brain here. So this would be, you could say, your instinctual brain. You don't think about what's going on with your mesencephalon, this part right here, and your pons. You don't think about those, but the pons is where the parasympathetics come from. The mesencephalon is where the sympathetics come from, right there. So the sympathetics and the parasympathetics are part of that archaeocortex, that instinctual brain. And how your instinctual brain is controlled by the neocortex is through the frontal lobe here. And I say all this because it's important when we look at a person's autonomics, and if they're both through the roof, or if just the sympathetics are very high. We have to go back to neurology. And though it's a little confusing, let me talk through this. Your frontal lobe's communication to both the sympathetics in the mesencephalon and the parasympathetics in the pons is inhibitory, meaning that your prefrontal lobe and your frontal cortex, without your knowledge even, so it's not volitional, fires neurons back to the mesencephalon and neurons back to the pons that inhibit it. So think of the frontal lobe as the executive of the brain, or the parent of the brain, and the midbrain here, the archaeocortex, is like a naughty teenager. It always just wants to fire. It always just wants to do what it wants to do. And it's without the parent saying, you can't do that, calm down, settle down, sit in your seat, be quiet. This just acts out. So when I have a decrease in my communication from my frontal lobe to my midbrain, I'm going to have a graph where both of these are sky high. If I solely have a decrease in my communication to my mesencephalon, I'm going to have a graph where just my sympathetics are high. So from a neurological component, my sympathetics can ride high because of lack of inhibition from my frontal lobe to where the sympathetics are housed, which is the mesencephalon. Follow me? So from a neurological perspective, if we see on the graph that the person has either one or both of those that are really high through the roof, we want to look at, is there a source of inflammation that's blocking that communication? Is there an issue with the frontal lobe that it's not communicating to the mesencephalon or the pons? And we see that this a lot with people with Lyme disease, or a person that has brain cancer, or a person that has any sort of inflammation due to toxicity, due to something that's going on in the brain. Inflammation in the brain is going to decrease my frontal lobe's communication to the midbrain. It is going to have these guys act out in a hyperfunction because that's what they would do if they didn't have the inhibition from the frontal lobe. So lack of frontal lobe inhibition to the sympathetics will cause the sympathetics to go sky high. Lack of frontal lobe inhibition to both of them will cause both of them to go sky high. Now, in my other videos, I talk about the neurotransmitters that are involved with that, and this is important too. So as we look at somebody's genetics, they can have genetic defects on specific genes that could cause excitatory neurotransmitters to stay in the brain for a long period of time and actually you can make more excitatory neurotransmitters than you're supposed to. And that could be a piece of this too. But right now we're talking about the neurology. So the neurotransmitter that we're talking about in this is typically glutamate. So watch some of the videos on glutamine and glutamate. And that's why we don't want people that have brain cancer to be eating a lot of glutamine, because it converts to glutamate and causes this to ramp up and causes inflammation in the brain. But that's another topic altogether. So the neurology is the frontal lobe is supposed to inhibit the midbrain. And when it doesn't inhibit the midbrain, we have abnormal findings here. So there are some exercises that we've created. These are just functional neurology exercises that can help with these. So if I have a hypersympathetic state, I know that I have a hypermesencephalon. So I aptly named these the high-firing mesencephalic therapy. So I could easily said that this is for a hypersympathetic state. Same thing. So here's some specific exercises that we could do with that. And I'm not going to go through these on this video altogether. So if you're a patient of ours and you have your test that we did on you, and you have hypersympathetic or both of them, we would give you a handout like this that I would have you start doing. So remember, on this thing right here, hypersympathetic state is going to dilate your pupils. So if we wear sunglasses, that's going to help calm the mesencephalon down. And it's been found that certain colored sunglasses can actually be more appropriate. Rose-colored, amber-colored, even with some people, a light violet or purplish color to the sunglasses can be very soothing to calm the mesencephalon. So what kind of symptoms would a person be having if they're stuck in a hypersympathetic state? They might be extremely anxious, have a lot of anxiety in their body. They can't calm that down. They're stuck in a hypermesencephalic state. Putting on a pair of rose-colored glasses or amber-colored glasses or yellowish or purplish glasses, and they go, wow, this just makes me feel so much calmer. Can be very beneficial. From a straight neurology perspective, placing a cotton ball or one of those foam things that block hearing in your right ear can calm the mesencephalon. Breathing a foul smell, or what you consider a foul smell, in your right nostril, so you close your left nostril and just breathe into the right nostril, can calm the mesencephalon. This is just straight neurology. Slow, deep belly breathing, playing memory games, that's a frontal lobe stimulation. doing things like the chi machine, which helps move lymph, but it stimulates the cerebellum, which inversely stimulates the frontal lobe, which can calm the mesencephalon. Vibration therapy works on the same pathway, can calm the mesencephalon. Watching glutamate levels, we talked about that briefly. That's the neurotransmitter that we're looking at. Looking at inflammation with inflammatory foods. So lots of times you see with gluten and dairy issues causes inflammation in the brain. Inflammation of the brain, if it affects that communication between the frontal lobe and the midbrain, can cause a high riding mesencephalon, and you can go into a sympathetic dominant state. So these are some exercises that you could do. Exercises to stimulate the vagal nerve. So if we're in a state where we see a lot of patients that they have a hypersympathetics and a very low parasympathetics, they're going to have a very hard time fighting off cancer or something like that. So we want to stimulate the parasympathetics. So one of the key things to do to stimulate the parasympathetics are where can we access that? So the vagal nerve or cranial nerve 10 is your main parasympathetic pathway. Gargling, stimulated a gag reflex, humming loudly, singing can stimulate a parasympathetic reaction. This is one of the key components that we use, especially with cancer patients, to stimulate a parasympathetic response, and that is doing coffee or probiotic enemas. Now, you might have heard that coffee enemas are really good for your liver. They detox your liver. Yes, but maybe one of the most beneficial things about a coffee enema is it stimulates the parasympathetic system through almost direct stimulation of the vagal nerve in the rectal area. So these are some things that we'd want to do to calm down and to control the autonomics, because the autonomics control all your organ function. You don't even have to know that you have a liver. It's controlled by your autonomic nervous system. So if we could get a better handle on the autonomics, and we can measure it, and we can make sure that we're getting a handle on it, we could give our body a better chance to heal. All right, look at some of the other videos that I have on glutamate and glutamine and how that affects your brain and the autonomics and cancer and such, as well as anxiety and things. I hope this video helped, and we will talk very soon.